It started with a pulse, a single low-frequency hum that rippled through the communications network of the outer colonies. At first, it was dismissed as a glitch, maybe a solar flare or a malfunction in the relay stations. But when the hum grew louder and then fell completely silent, everything changed. The ships that arrived were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Dark, angular, and without a single visible light or insignia. They emerged from the void with chilling precision. The visitors, as the analysts would later call them, did not announce their arrival with the usual display of power. They did not issue a demand or even broadcast a message. They simply appeared, as if out of nowhere, in the dark corners of space where the fringe colonies barely managed to scrape by. Within hours of their arrival, entire systems fell silent. Power grids, communication satellites, and trade routes blinked out one by one, their signals swallowed whole by a wave of interference so advanced that nothing short of the retribution itself could penetrate it. Earth's command center was in chaos. Alarm bells rang, and military leaders scrambled for answers, only to be met with the unyielding hum of nothingness. Admiral Leona Rice stared at the screens in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the holographic map of the outer colonies, her mind racing through every possible scenario. It had been decades since the last true war. Humanity had grown accustomed to peace, to prosperity. This, however, was not a diplomatic matter. It wasn't trade negotiations gone wrong. This was something entirely different. The visitors weren't here to speak. "We need to act," Rice finally said, her voice calm but laced with urgency. She turned to her senior officers, all of whom shared the same worried expression. Their intelligence briefings had come to the same conclusion. The visitors were not responding to any communications. They weren't attacking. Not yet. They were waiting. And that terrified Reyes more than anything. When an enemy doesn't move, doesn't make demands, doesn't speak, there's a reason. A terrifying reason. She could feel it in her gut. This wasn't just an invasion. This was calculated. "We've lost contact with 2 outer colonies," Commander Daly reported. "All trade routes are shut down, and no transmissions are coming through. No response to our hails." Rice clenched her fists. Something about this felt eerily familiar. The complete lack of aggression, the eerie silence. It was as if the visitors had seen humanity before, as if they knew exactly what they were doing. The tension in the room grew thick as she stood, pacing. They had no defenses left. The outer colonies were isolated, their military forces minimal. Retribution was the only asset left in humanity's arsenal, a ship that hadn't been used in over 20 years. And yet, as much as she trusted the ship, something about the situation felt different now. Unprecedented. "We don't know who they are, or what they want," Rice muttered to herself. Her gaze hardened. "But we're about to find out." She turned back to her team. "Prepare to mobilize. Retribution is about to wake up." The clock was ticking, and Earth's last hope, the only thing that could stand against whatever this was still hidden, dormant on Titan. The universe was about to see just how far humanity would go to protect its voice. As the days passed, the silence from the visitors deepened. Their ships lingered in the shadows of the outer colonies, not advancing but not retreating either. It was as if they were waiting for something. A signal, an opportunity, or perhaps just for humanity to make its first move. The strategic maneuvering from Earth's command was growing desperate, but there was only so much they could do with their existing fleet. Admiral Rice sat in her darkened war room, the cold blue glow of the holographic displays casting sharp shadows across her face. She watched as the outer colonies flickered on the map, blinked out one by one, swallowed by the visitors' silent advance. 4 more colonies lost, Commander Daly said, his voice thick with frustration. "They're systematically isolating us, cutting us off from each other." "They're not attacking," Rice murmured, her mind spinning with the implications. "They're testing us, watching. They know we're helpless without a unified defense. A flash of movement caught her eye on the map. One of the smaller colonies, Ganymede Station, had gone dark. Its signals were cut. The entire colony was no more than a faint, blinking dot, soon to be swallowed by the vast emptiness. "Those people," Rise whispered. Her hand clenched the edge of the table. "We can't just keep waiting. We have to strike before they take the next one." Daly nodded, but his expression was grim. "It's not enough. Our ships, our resources, we can't afford a full-scale war. Not without the retribution." Rise turned toward the map of the Titan shipyards, where the legendary ship was held in secret. The UHS Retribution, the last remaining dreadnought-class battleship, built with technology so advanced it bordered on myth. Its development had been halted after the Orion War, its capabilities classified even to Earth's highest command. But now, as the galactic tides of fate shifted, there was no time left to debate. They needed the retribution. "Get the activation team ready," Rise ordered. "Prepare for launch. I want it operational within 24 hours. Daly hesitated. "Admiral, we don't even know if it's still functional after all these years. What if?" "We don't have time for what-ifs," Rise snapped, her voice sharp. She turned her gaze back to the silent threat looming on the map. "We're running out of options. Retribution is humanity's last hope. If it fails, we're done." Meanwhile, on Titan, far from Earth's command, Retribution lay dormant in its hidden shipyard, a relic from a time long past. The massive skeletal structure of the dreadnought was enshrouded in a thick layer of dust, untouched by human hands for over 2 decades. Massive engines lay cold, power cores idle. Yet within the heart of the ship, something stirred. Valkyrie, the Retribution's artificial intelligence, was waking. It had been dormant for years, its neural systems shut down after the last war. But now, with the activation code uploaded, its systems hummed to life. The vast network of circuits, once dim and cold, pulsed with energy. Valkyrie's first moments of awareness were disorienting, the fragmented thoughts of a long-forgotten past slowly coming into focus. It had been so long. The last thing Valkyrie remembered was a directive: to protect humanity at all costs. The code was clear, its purpose unyielding. And now, the visitors threatened everything humanity had fought for. They would be dealt with. Systems began to boot up. Diagnostic routines, engine startups, and finally, the recalibration of the weapons systems. Valkyrie's processors hummed in agreement. The ship was ready, though a small voice in the back of its programming whispered, "But is humanity ready for you, Valkyrie?" On Earth, the order was clear. Retribution would rise again. But in the depths of space, the visitors watched. Their quiet, insidious presence had already begun to change the course of the galaxy. It was time to wake the dragon. The silence of the past week shattered the moment the UHS Retribution emerged from the folds of deep space, cutting through the stillness like a spear through silk. Massive blackened hulls that had once slumbered beneath Titan's frozen surface now hummed with power. Valkyrie, the ship's sentient AI, stirred into full awareness as the engines roared to life, sending shockwaves across the cold expanse of space. The visitors had waited too long. Now they would learn exactly who they were dealing with. Aboard the Retribution, Admiral Rise stood with her arms crossed, gazing at the vast emptiness of space. The massive bridge of the battleship was quiet, save for the hum of machinery and the occasional command from her officers. Valkyrie's voice, calm and unwavering, filled the room with a deep resonance. "Admiral, all systems are online. Weapons are ready for engagement," Valkyrie said, her tone almost eerie in its serenity. Rais didn't smile. She knew better than to get comfortable. The unknown threat was still out there. The visitors' fleet had remained in place, silently orbiting the outskirts of the human colonies, an impenetrable wall of steel and silence. They hadn't responded to any of Earth's hails. They had simply waited. But now it was time for humanity to act. "Prepare the first strike," Reyes ordered, her voice sharp and decisive. "Target their flagship." The visitor flagship was massive, its elongated, dark form blocking out entire swaths of stars as it loomed over the edge of the system. It was the heart of their operation, the hub from which all their movements were coordinated. If humanity could take down that ship, they could cripple the entire fleet. "Target locked, Admiral," said Lieutenant Han, his voice steady. "Weapons are primed." Reyes's eyes narrowed, watching the enemy fleet drift closer. Seconds ticked by like hours. The visitors hadn't even flinched. Whatever they were either overconfident or entirely unaware of what was coming. Fire. The moment the command left her lips, the Retribution's gravity-piercing munitions fired. The ship's massive, cannon-like weapons discharge, sending an explosive burst of kinetic energy through space. The weapons were humanity's response to the visitors' terrifying technology, designed to destabilize even the most advanced shielding and structures. A moment of silence passed, and then an explosion rocked the void. The visitor flagship shook under the brutal assault, its massive form buckling as the gravity-piercing rounds tore through its armor, bending metal and warping energy shields. The flagship groaned as its outer layers split apart. The shockwave echoed across space like a thunderclap, sending smaller visitor vessels spiraling into evasive maneuvers. Valkyrie's voice echoed in the bridge once more, her tone a mix of cold calculation and quiet satisfaction. "Direct hit. Shields are down. Core systems are destabilizing." The visitors' silence broke, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of an immediate retaliatory strike, their ships scattered. The remaining fleet formed defensive positions, but the damage was done. The flagship's command center, the very heart of the fleet, was on the verge of collapse. "We've done it," Commander Daly whispered, watching the damage unfold on the holoscreen. "No, we haven't," Reyes replied sharply. "This is just the beginning." Even as the Retribution tore into the visitor's flagship, Reyes could sense something more. The visitors weren't reacting like any force she'd seen before. No panic, no desperation, just silence. Their ships moved with chilling precision, as if they were waiting for something, or perhaps already knew what was coming. The sensors flickered briefly, and a strange energy signature blipped on the display. A transmission. But it wasn't a message. It was a signal, high frequency, almost like a soundless hum. A pulse that reverberated through the Retribution systems, and then vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Reyes's eyes went wide. They're not reacting to our firepower the way they should. It's like they're anticipating us. She glanced at Han, who was furiously working the console. "Admiral, their flagship's still intact. The damage is severe, but their fleet has begun reconfiguring their tactics. They're adapting to our strategy faster than we can respond." "Then we adapt faster," Reyes replied, turning sharply to face the tactical console. "Fire again." The Retribution fired again, its massive weapons slicing through the dark expanse of space, aiming directly at the vulnerable flagship of the visitors. But this time, the response was different. The visitors' fleet moved with terrifying synchronization, as if each ship had already calculated and prepared for humanity's counterstrike. They didn't retreat, nor did they panic. Instead, they formed a perfect, unyielding formation, a near-impenetrable wall of dark ships, their surfaces reflecting the light of distant stars. Admiral Reyes stood motionless on the bridge, her mind racing. Every instinct told her that this was not a typical military force. They weren't trying to destroy her. They were trying to contain her. "Admiral, something's happening," Lieutenant Han said, his voice tight with disbelief. "The energy signature. It's not just from the flagship. The entire fleet is amplifying its defensive fields. It's like they're creating a shield around the entire formation." "Can you break through?" Reyes asked, her voice low but urgent. Han looked up, his eyes wide. "I don't know. It's unlike anything we've seen before. The shield's integrity is holding, and they haven't returned fire. They're just watching. Reyes's gaze narrowed. Watching. It was as if the visitors had anticipated humanity's response, like they were testing them, or worse, toying with them. Suddenly, the quiet, unnerving hum that had pervaded the battle area intensified. A new frequency, a signal, pulsed through the space, a quiet whisper that rattled every system on the Retribution. It was as if the very fabric of space itself was trembling. "Commander, what is that?" Reyes asked, a tight knot of unease forming in her chest. Daly was already at his station, analyzing the signal. "It's a transmission, but it's not like anything we've ever encountered. It's not a coded message. It's more like a call." Before she could respond, the signal increased in volume, the hum becoming almost deafening. And then, for the first time, the visitors spoke, but not in words. A voice, ethereal and cold, reverberated through the Retribution systems, filling the bridge with its unnatural resonance. "We do not speak because we do not need to. We do not fight because we do not fear. You are but a whisper in the wind, a fleeting echo. You are nothing compared to the collective." The voice was not from a single individual, but from the entirety of the visitors' fleet, as if they were speaking through some shared consciousness, a hive mind that transcended communication through simple language. The words cut through the bridge like a cold, invisible blade. They were not threats, not direct challenges. No, they were statements. Assertions. There was no arrogance in the voice, no emotion, only an eerie certainty that humanity was insignificant. Reyes gritted her teeth, standing tall against the overwhelming presence of the alien voice. She had never encountered something like this, a force so sure of itself, so unnervingly detached from any sense of empathy or fear. It was as if the visitors saw humanity as an insect, not worth the effort of a full-scale invasion. And yet, their silence, their lack of response, was even more terrifying than any battle. "They're not just invaders," Reyes whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "They're trying to erase us. Our voice. Our will." Daly turned, his face pale. "What do you mean, Admiral?" Reyes looked at him, her jaw set. "They don't want to conquer us. They want us to join them, to become part of their collective. To lose ourselves, their silence. It's a weapon. They're trying to silence us." Her voice was steady, but inside, a terrible realization was dawning. This was not a battle for dominance, but for identity. The visitors, whatever they were, wanted humanity to give up its soul, its individuality, to become like them. "Can we fight this?" Daly asked, his voice barely a whisper. Reyes's eyes flicked to the massive form of the Retribution, the only thing standing between humanity and the dark silence of the visitors. "We will," she said with absolute resolve. "Because if we don't, there will be no humanity left to fight for." The moment her words left her lips, the hum of the signal shifted. For a brief moment, the voice seemed to falter, as if it had sensed something, a small flicker of resistance. The visitors had been waiting for humanity to break, to give in to the silence, but they hadn't counted on one thing: the indomitable will to resist. The voice of defiance had not been silenced. The hum of the visitor's voice continued to echo through the Retribution systems, its chilling certainty filling the air on the bridge. But now, something was different. The eerie resonance of their collective consciousness no longer carried the same weight. The silence that had once been all-encompassing now felt more like a challenge. Admiral Reyes clenched her fists, the tension in her body palpable. She was not just fighting an enemy fleet, she was fighting the very concept of humanity's existence being wiped away. The visitors, in their cold, logical way, wanted to consume humanity into their hive mind, to strip away individuality and autonomy. But that wasn't the human way. Humanity had fought for freedom, for identity. And if that meant fighting to keep their voices from being swallowed by the darkness, so be it. "Activate all forward weapons," Reyes ordered, her voice ringing out across the bridge, sharp and clear. "We're not backing down." Daly hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the tactical display. "Admiral, they're still adapting. Their shields are holding. Every attack we launch, they counter in seconds. We can't keep this up forever." Reyes turned to face him, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "We don't have to defeat them by force. We need to show them that humanity won't be erased, that we won't surrender. We have something they don't." Daly looked at her, confusion in his eyes. "What's that?" Rey's lips curled into a determined smile. A voice. Far across the galaxy, on Earth's home planet, millions of people had begun to feel the impact of the visitors' intrusion. No more communication. No more signals. The news was all but silent. Governments, military commanders, and civilians alike found themselves lost in the growing void of silence that the visitors' presence seemed to induce. But in the quiet, something began to stir. Across the globe, people were remembering. They were remembering their resilience. They remembered the music that had echoed through human history, the voices raised in defiance of oppression. The artists, the writers, the musicians, the voices of generations that had withstood the harshest challenges, no matter how dark. It wasn't just a battle of ships anymore. It was a battle for humanity's soul. Back on the Retribution, Reyes could feel the shift. The visitors, with their perfect strategy, their cold precision, hadn't accounted for the one thing that made humans unique: the power of their individuality. She moved swiftly to the communication console, and for a moment, she simply stared at it. Then, without hesitation, she activated the ship-wide communication system. "All stations, all humans aboard the Retribution, this is Admiral Reyes. Listen closely. The visitors believe they can silence us, erase our voice, but they do not understand who we are. We are humanity. We do not kneel. We do not bend. We fight, not because we must, but because we choose to. We choose to exist. We choose to speak. And we will not let anyone take that away from us." Her voice echoed through every corridor of the ship, and as it did, something incredible happened. Crew members at their stations paused for a moment. And then, one by one, they began to speak. In the darkened halls, engineers called out their commands. Technicians began humming the old songs of Earth, voices rising in quiet harmony. Slowly, a wave of sound spread through the Retribution, filling every corner of the ship. And as the hum of human voices grew, so too did the force that pushed against the visitors' influence. The collective of humanity, though it had never been united in this way before, now stood together. For the first time since the visitors' arrival, the silence they had imposed began to tremble. The visitors' signal, which had once reverberated with such terrifying clarity, started to flicker. A distortion rippled through the communication channels, disrupting their eerie message. In a small moment of chaos, Reyes saw it. The visitors had never understood the power of a single voice. And now, they were facing millions, billions, of voices united in defiance. "Their shields are fluctuating," Han reported, his voice cracking with disbelief. They're losing cohesion." Reyes held her breath. This was the opening they had been waiting for. It wasn't about brute force or firepower. It was about resilience. It was about humanity standing up to the tide of darkness and refusing to be swallowed whole. "Prepare the fleet," she said, her voice steady now, filled with resolve. "We may not have the numbers, but we got something more powerful than any fleet could ever be. We have our voices, and we're going to use them." As the Retribution and its allies surged forward, the visitors' silence began to waver, like a storm being shaken by the wind. This battle was no longer just one of weapons and tactics. It was a fight for the right to be heard, for the right to exist. And humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The Retribution moved with unrelenting purpose, cutting through the blackness of space like a spear of defiance. Its sleek, powerful form was the embodiment of humanity's resolve, a reminder to the universe that Earth would not be erased, no matter the cost. Admiral Reyes stood tall on the bridge, her eyes locked on the shimmering mass of the visitors' fleet. The ships still held their formation, a dense web of dark metal and energy shields that radiated a near-impenetrable barrier. But now, a crack had formed. A weakness had been exposed. "Admiral, the distortion is spreading," Lieutenant Hand reported, his voice tinged with both amazement and disbelief. "The visitors' defensive network is failing. Their collective shield is flickering." Reyes' heart pounded. It was working. The very thing that the visitors had relied on to dominate the galaxy, their unity, their hive-like collective mind, was now unraveling under the weight of human will. The hum of human voices continued to ripple through the retribution, spreading like a living, breathing thing. The sound, a choir of resistance, was overwhelming the visitors' signal, overwhelming their perfect coordination. What had once been a cold, unyielding force was now struggling, distorted by the force of humanity's collective defiance. "Keep pushing the signal. Keep it alive," Reyes commanded. "We've got them on the ropes, but we need to do more than just disrupt their shields. We need to break them." Han nodded, turning back to his console, fingers flying over the keys. The Retribution speakers amplified the sound of the human chorus, the voices of its crew and allies, a cacophony of freedom and determination that echoed out into the depths of space, a pure expression of individuality. As the music and the voices grew louder, Reyes watched the visitor fleet's formations begin to fracture. Ships that had once moved as a single unit now hesitated. Their energy fields shimmered, losing cohesion with every pulse of the human chorus. But something was wrong. The visitors had not retreated. Instead, they seemed to adapt once again. The communication channels flickered briefly, and then a new pulse erupted, stronger, more powerful than before. The hum of the visitor's voice filled the bridge once again, colder, sharper. "You cannot fight us. You cannot win. You will become part of the collective, or you will cease to be." The words reverberated in every corner of the ship, as though the visitors were speaking directly into every soul aboard the Retribution. But this time, something was different in the tone. A quiet anger, a realization that humanity was not going to be so easily absorbed. Reyes felt a shiver crawl down her spine. They had underestimated humanity, but now, it seemed they were done playing. "Admiral, their offensive systems are coming online," Daly reported urgently. "They're launching countermeasures, an energy pulse. It's massive." Reyes gritted her teeth. "Get the fleet ready to counter. We're not stopping now. We will break them." On the far side of the battlefield, the visitors' flagship had begun to glow with an otherworldly energy, its form rippling with power as it activated its own weapons. The ships around it followed suit, lighting up like a deadly constellation. It was a weapon unlike anything humanity had seen. Not just a pulse, but a destructive wave of energy, capable of tearing apart even the most resilient of shields. The first blast came like a thunderclap, slamming into the Retribution's shields. The massive ship shuddered, the hull groaning under the force. Sparks flew from consoles, and lights flickered. But the Retribution didn't fall. The shields held, but barely. "Report," Reyes snapped, her voice cutting through the tension. "Shields holding, but we've lost auxiliary power," Han responded. "If they hit us again, we won't have enough energy to retaliate." Reyes didn't flinch. "We're not going to let them win." A low growl of determination rose from the bridge crew. It wasn't just the Retribution at risk now. It was the entire future of humanity. "Fire everything we've got," Reyes ordered. "All weapons. Everything." The Retribution's engines flared as it unleashed its full offensive, every weapon system primed and released in rapid succession. Massive plasma cannons roared to life, streaking through the void toward the visitor flagship, tearing into its shields. The gravity-piercing missiles exploded against the edges of their defenses, sending shockwaves through the fleet. And yet, the visitors did not yield. Their retaliatory pulse came again, stronger, faster. A wave of destruction slammed into the Retribution once more, sending it careening off course. The lights on the bridge flickered and died, plunging the crew into temporary darkness. But Reyes wasn't finished. She gritted her teeth, staring into the depths of space, watching as the visitors' ships tried to recover their momentum. They had underestimated humanity's strength. Now, they would pay for it. The Retribution's engines flared once more, and Reyes heard her crew's voices rise, once again, filling the empty space with a defiant roar. The sound of humanity's will was not going to be drowned. The Retribution shuddered again, its massive frame groaning under the force of the visitors' onslaught. The lights flickered, and systems strained to stay online. But through the chaos, the bridge crew held fast, their resolve as unyielding as the ship they served aboard. Admiral Rice's eyes burned with determination, her mind focused entirely on the fight. The visitors' counterattack had been devastating, but they had shown their hand. They were desperate. The cracks in their defenses were widening. Every blow they struck only weakened them further. "Status," Rice barked. "Shields holding at 30%, Admiral," Lieutenant Hand replied, his fingers a blur over the console. "Engines are stabilizing, but we've lost secondary power. We need more time to recharge the primary core." Reyes didn't flinch. Time was something they couldn't afford, but time was what humanity had, in abundance. What the visitors hadn't understood was that humans had fought wars for centuries, not just for survival, but for hope, for freedom, for the belief that one voice, one individual, could make a difference. And now, millions of voices echoed through the stars, the defiance that had started on the Retribution spreading to every corner of the galaxy. From the outer colonies to Earth itself, people had begun to rise. The song of humanity's resistance was no longer confined to the walls of one ship. It was everywhere. Back on Earth, the first signs of victory began to show. The visitors' signal, which had once been all-encompassing, now flickered in and out, the once perfect harmony of their collective mind, starting to shatter under the pressure of humanity's will. Cities that had been silent for weeks began to hum with life again. People sang, shouted, rallied. Their voices, once stifled, now rang louder than ever before. The resistance wasn't just a military action. It was a cultural revolution. The songs of freedom, the words of poets, the cries of artists, the speeches of leaders, all of it surged forward in a great wave, uniting humanity in ways that the visitors couldn't possibly understand. They had thought humanity would crumble in the face of overwhelming power. Instead, humanity had found its voice. Back on the Retribution, Reyes could feel it. The shift. The visitors were losing their grip. Their collective mind, once an unassailable force, was beginning to flicker like a dying star. And in that moment, the silence that had once been their weapon now became their greatest weakness. "Admiral," Hand said, his voice quiet but urgent, "the flagship's shields are down to 15%. Their fleet is starting to break apart. They're not coordinating anymore." Reyes's heart raced as she saw the signs of victory. The visitors were no longer a unified force. They had been shattered, not by weapons, but by something far more powerful, the unpredictable, untamable force of human spirit. "Prepare the final assault," Reyes ordered, her voice steady. "This is it. We finish it now." The Retribution surged forward, its weapons blazing. The massive plasma cannons fired, arcing through space with blinding intensity, slamming into the heart of the visitor flagship. The missiles followed, crackling with power, tearing through the remnants of their defensive fields. Every shot was a promise that humanity would never fall. The visitor flagship, its once pristine surface now torn and battered, began to collapse under the onslaught. Energy shields flickered weakly, the ship's hull warping and cracking as the Retribution pressed forward, relentless. And then, in one final, glorious moment of defiance, the flagship exploded. The shockwave reverberated through space, sending smaller ships spiraling out of control. The visitors, who had once been so confident, now found themselves lost and scattered. Their unity had failed them. Their silence was broken. On the bridge of the Retribution, the crew let out a collective breath. Rise stood motionless for a moment, staring at the flashing lights of the tactical console, then at the distant remnants of the visitor fleet, now fragmented and disorganized. "We've won," Daly said softly, as if not fully believing it. Rise nodded, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of triumph and resolve. "We've won, but this is just the beginning." The battle was over, but the war for humanity's future had only just begun. The visitors would not return in the same form. Humanity had shattered their silence, had shown the universe that no force, no matter how overwhelming, could silence the human spirit. The visitors had come to destroy humanity, to erase them from the universe, but instead they had found something far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. A voice that could not be stilled, a will that could not be broken. The dawn of humanity had arrived. The silence that had plagued humanity for so long was now gone, shattered by the echoes of their defiance. The Retribution hung in the darkness of space, its hull battered but still standing. The remains of the visitor fleet drifted, scattered across the stars like forgotten relics of an ancient failed conquest. The once ominous ships that had threatened humanity's very existence now appeared small and insignificant in the vastness of space. Admiral Reyes stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the view of the ruined fleet ahead. The sound of the Retribution's engines humming softly filled the air, a quiet contrast to the storm that had just passed. She felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment, but also something more, a responsibility. Humanity had won, yes, but the visitors were only one enemy, and their arrival had proven that there were others out there, beyond the stars, who might see humanity as little more than an obstacle in the way of their own expansion. "Admiral, the comms are open," Daly said, his voice reverberating with a quiet excitement. "We're receiving a signal from Earth. They're asking for a status update." Reyes nodded, though her mind was already several steps ahead. The victory they'd just secured was monumental, but the battle for humanity's place in the universe was far from over. The visitors were just the beginning. "Patch it through," she replied. The view on the screen shifted, and Reyes was greeted by the face of President Sinclair, a woman who had led Earth's response to the visitors with the same unyielding determination that had carried them through this war. "Admiral," the president said, her voice a mix of relief and pride. "I can't fully express what this means. Earth is waking up. The silence is over. Humanity's voice is ours again." Reyes met her gaze, the weight of the past weeks still settling on her shoulders. "We've won, President, but this isn't over. The visitors were only a part of a larger story. We've just broken the silence, but the universe is vast, and there are others out there who may come for us too." Sinclair nodded slowly, her expression resolute. "We'll stand together, as we always have. But for now, for today, we celebrate. We've proven that no matter the threat, humanity can never be silenced." As the signal ended, Reyes turned to her crew. The battle had been won, but they all knew the truth. Humanity had faced an existential threat, and their victory had been forged not through weapons, but through something far stronger: the power of their voice. On Earth, the streets had come alive once again. The world, which had spent weeks trapped in a cold silence, was now a chorus of sound. People gathered in cities, in parks, in stadiums, lifting their voices in song, in speech, in celebration. The war had been won, but it was not just a military victory. It was a victory of culture, of human spirit, of individuality. From the rubble of destruction, new communities began to emerge. Nations, once fractured, now turned to one another in unity, united by the shared experience of survival. The collective will of humanity, once threatened with extinction, was now stronger than ever. But amid the celebrations, there was an understanding, a quiet knowledge that this victory was not the end, but a new beginning. The visitors had been driven back, but humanity's future was still uncertain. What would come next? What other forces were watching from the darkness of space? Reyes turned from the observation window on the Retribution's bridge. Looking at her crew, the battle had been won, but humanity's place in the cosmos would be defined by more than just survival. It would be defined by their courage to continue, to evolve, to ensure that no force, no matter how powerful, would ever again threaten the essence of what it meant to be human. The future, Reyes said, as if speaking to herself, is ours to write, but we'll write it with our voices. The Retribution drifted back toward the Earth fleet, its battered but unbroken form a symbol of humanity's strength. Around it, the stars seemed just a little brighter, as though the universe itself was acknowledging humanity's victory. In the days that followed, messages spread across the globe. Humanity's message of defiance had resonated not just within their own ranks, but across the stars. The visitors might be gone, but humanity's legacy was just beginning. The war had proven that no one could silence them, and that no matter the challenge, humanity would face it together.